Quakertown and our local tech school. So we can try to coordinate as best as possible days in session, days out of session with those schools. The 16-17 calendar compared to the 15-16 calendar as far as patterns of days off and the same holidays and so forth is the same. There are a couple changes to highlight, and they are really due to the collective bargaining agreement. So I'll highlight those for you. The first one actually took place and was a revision this year that the Activities Committee looked at before our holiday break. And so that is reflected next year as well, and that is the deletion of the Thursday before Easter. That is to reduce the staff days by one this year, and so that's carried over to next year. And then if that would be a day that is, it's not a snow day anymore, so we don't have to worry about that. This year it could have been a snow day. Next year will not be. The snow day is Easter Monday.
Can you speak up a little bit, please?
Sure. The other days that were changed in next year's calendar is the days that were floating in-service days where staff could do professional development at their own time, at their own pace, and they were 2 flex days that were required. So that was deleted in next year's calendar. And then the other option, that wasn't a requirement, was that teachers could submit an application to do an alternative in-service day where they would exchange time with either the very first day of the school year or the last day, and that was the time teachers had to prepare their classrooms. So those are gone, and what's replaced that is trade days. And there were 2 days that were added to the next year that would be trade days. In order to reduce staff days by 1 again next year, again based on the new CBA, we had to get down then from 195 to 194. What we did was eliminate one of those trade days before it even really started. So we have 1 trade day that will be in this calendar. It's not indicated on here. It'll be indicated when the in-service schedule comes out, because it will be a day that one of these in-service days in the calendar will be able to be traded with the day that a teacher does a summer in-service session. And so we have to identify what would be the best day here depending on the content of our in-service is. We can't really identify the day yet. If we want teachers to all have the training before school starts, we have to trade with an August day. If we don't care and it's not an urgent one, we just want them to have it at some point, we could trade with the November day, for instance. So until we identify the content, we can't really identify which day to be traded. Otherwise, the number of in-service days, just in comparison, in 15-16, there were 9 days plus 2 flex days, so a total of 11. And then in the 16-17, flex went away, but then we added 1 trade day, so it'd be 10. So we went from 11 total days to 10 total days if you include those flex days in there. FaceTime with teacher, we actually gained 1, so I think that's a positive, because 2 of them it was on their own. I think that's really the highlights of the calendar. So we started with working with the schools in Tech that I mentioned, the faculty cabinet at the administration center reviewed this, principals reviewed this. I met with PA leadership team, Tim and his group, and they reviewed this. And really the questions that we kind of get are typically when marking periods end and things like that, so they can plan on when the exams would be. More of the practical day-to-day issues, it's kind of by level concerns. And other than that, as far as the makeup of the calendar, there really were no real questions or issues by those groups. So this is kind of the last step before we go to the board meeting on the 25th. If there's any questions or concerns, I'm happy to address them.
I have 2 questions. One is you talked about coordinating with Quakertown and Palisades. So how many days do we have that don't coordinate with the other 2 school districts for the VOTEC school?
At the time that we met, the director put up a big spreadsheet, and there was 2, I believe, that didn't match, but we were trying to work that down to 1. And I have not seen the final draft from Quakertown yet, but Palisades, there was 1 day difference. Quakertown, there was 2, but they were going to work it down to 1. So I believe at the end it's going to be 1. And I think it's the Thursday before Easter is going to be the day that's still different, because they do conferences. So for them, it would be an in-service day. For us, it's holiday, we're closed.
But that wouldn't be a problem, because the only concern we have with the VOTEC school is when students are going, right?
Correct.
Because if 2 schools are in session, then the VOTEC is open. If only 1 school is in session, the VOTEC is closed.
Right, so the only days then for students that would differ would be just when school ends in June. Other than that, because the number of our student days differ, but other than the number of student days, as far as days, in-session days off for students, they are going to match.
Okay, so, I mean, could you, I guess I would just want to, and if you could find out, because you said you didn't see the final draft, so before the board meeting, if we could just find out how many days. And I guess I'm more concerned with, are there days that affect the Pennridge students? Are there any days when Pennridge will be in session when we think the VOTEC will be closed? Because then we need to plan on what to do with those students, right? And
I believe that answer is no, but I'll make sure.
okay, right, so I would like to know that. And then my other question relates to the March 20th day. So it's a in-service, and then it's a snow makeup day, because actually in the current school calendar, we only have, I don't know, it seems like a different in-service, and there are only 2 snow makeup days built into the calendar, in addition to the 3 at the end, but 2 built in, and now there's 3 built in. So I'm just wondering what that day is.
What the third day is? The third
No, what March 20th is, and why that's an in-service, and then why that's a snow makeup day. Which I don't have a problem with, I'm just wondering what it is.
So that is an in-service day only because, well, that was one of the ones that was identified because that does match with when the other schools were holding in-service. And we were looking to put another in-service day into the calendar, so that's why we chose the 20th. And we also had that long stretch there without a break for students. So that day was to match the in-service days of the other schools, and because we did need to get one more in the calendar. I'm sorry, the second part of that question.
Yeah, no, but it seems like an additional day. Is that because they lost the flex day? Is that why? Because it seems like there is actually one more built into because we have the same number right before school starts, there's one at the end of school.
Are you referring to number of snow days? Because on this past year's calendar, and this was, Al created before I came, but the bottom, it says includes 3 snow days, but I only see 2 snow days identified. There's only 2 I see highlighted, so.
No, but that's different. There are 2 snow makeup days built into the calendar, and then there are 3 built in at the end of the school year.
That's referring to the end, correct.
Right, so there are actually 5 days built in, but I'm saying next year's calendar, there are 6.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess rhyme or reason for that was just so there wouldn't have to be as many days at the end if we had a bit winter. It was really the only reason. One of the schools had one of the November days identified as a snow makeup day or weather makeup day with their thought that, several years back we had the bad flooding in October and around that time of year, or the beginning of the school year. So they had a November date identified, so they have 3 as well. We added the 3rd one later in the year because also most of the time schools will do the makeup day if it's up to even the day before the snow day you've identified, where we give about 4 weeks notice to cut off to say, hey, if it snows prior, if you notice that February 17th, if it snows prior to January 19th, we'll use that. Otherwise, it would go to the March date, the next day that that's available. So because we give that notice, that was another reason why I felt we needed to have another day in there, because we could very easily miss, if we don't get snow makeup day before January 19th, we can't even use the February date. So in that regard, we've added to it already.
Well, and Christine, you would remember at one point, there used to be a December day,
Yeah.
that if we didn't have snow by December, like I think it was a January snow day, that was always built in there as a snow day, but rarely did we ever use it because, again, snow, but, the one year we had the hurricane, which we lost school several days with that, but that's a much more rare occurrence. My only question, so right now, the 14th is identified as the last day. So, looking for a mild winter, then we would basically take off that week, 12, 13, 14.
If nothing was tied on the end, correct?
even though they're not yellow as snow days on the calendar, that's.
Because the idea is so that parents plan for a later end of the school year, so if you get out sooner,
It's a bonus.
it's a positive
Well,
rather
for some
than
it's a bonus.
now we've extended the school year and I've already made my vacation
Yeah.
plans.
Yeah,
And then
but I'm
people
just
have a
saying there,
problem.
you know, it states it there in text, but unlike the other snow days, it's shown, you know, with the highlights, so
I
those
think
three.
I think it used to be, it's last year's calendar, I think it used to be highlighted, maybe.
It may have been.
But, so that, those days though, is that set in the contract? Is that what we have? Because, you know, Pennridge goes more days than are required, right? And I know that there are many school districts that, rather than having these 3 days tacked on at the end, I mean, we don't get a spring break, we don't get a, you know, it seems like, well, why do we feel the need to build in those 3 at the end? I'm just thinking about where I lived before, they didn't tack on days until you went past 5. So if you had 6 snow days, then they added a day to the end of the year. It was really clear and easy to understand, instead of trying to say, well, this is the last day, so maybe we're going to subtract 3 days. And, you know, I just looked before I came up tonight, and I looked at a lot of different school districts here, and again, back where we lived in Maryland and Virginia, and, you know, it seems that some schools either build them in or tack them on, but nobody does both quite the way that we do. So I was curious as to why we feel the need to do that when there's some really successful school districts. It's not really a question of sacrificing the quality of instruction, because I'm talking about like Fairfax County Schools in Virginia, which is, you know, one of the top of the nation. So I'm just curious, and I mean, I would love to see it since we're going back before Labor Day. It seems like we're doing something, and I thought maybe it was tied to the contract or.
Well, so the maximum student days would be 184. You know, it says 187 because of the 3 snow days. 184 is really, realistically, the max days. I know what you're saying, and I think it's a philosophical discussion that the board will have to have, especially now that there's several new members, as far as number of days. You know, for instance, some schools, if they have the 184 or 183, the first snow day starts getting tacked off there, and that's probably what you're talking about. So in our scenario, there'd be 4 days that you wouldn't make up, and then your 5th day you'd start making up. So that's a scenario I've seen. Another option is Act 80 days in the calendar. And I know tomorrow at our Act 48 committee, I know that's going to be an agenda item, is possibility of bringing back some Act 80, even half days or early dismissal
Right.
days,
Yeah,
to get some time in. Because there's so many things that are now required by the state as far as these mandated trainings, that we're losing more and more curriculum-type professional development time. And so that's an option for us to try to see how can we add more PD time in here without adding more days to the end of the calendar. So if the board is receptive to that, and I'll continue to have those discussions. You'll be there tomorrow, correct,
Yeah.
for Act 48? And I know that we're going to talk about that. That's another option of, not for next year, but for the following year. The other thing is, at the meeting with Palisades Quakertown, we talked about 2 possibilities for the future that's kind of been on the radar. I think they've talked about it for a couple of years, is my understanding. One is floating the day in January. Isn't a big thing, but the day that would come in between semesters, so it would always stay between semesters instead of being on that scheduled day. Especially at the secondary level, that would be a benefit to have that transition day between semesters. That was one of the purposes, preparing for second semester. And the other thing they did talk about was the possibility of a spring break, and pull the Easter Monday and have the Monday through Friday off that week. And then that would be another discussion. Can you touch that week for snow days or not? You do start pulling. So that is something that I know they're going to want to discuss as a possibility for next year. So we'll have to get feedback from this group as far as that before I even get into that discussion with them.
Okay, well, I think that families are really, everybody I know that tries to be very mindful of not taking their kids out of school. I see people asking, when are the PSSAs? And, you know, they really want to try not to miss that instructional time. But it seems like we're constricting people to shorter and shorter periods of time where you can do those things with your family, which I find very valuable. To me, it is educational to go somewhere with your family. So whatever we can do to kind of meet families halfway and give them some more flexibility for having family time, I would appreciate that. And I do think that, to me, and people say this too, I'd rather have the days taken back, even though it's kind of a bummer, it's a little bit of a letdown. It's a bummer, but they say I'd rather have that than added on at the end. And also in my mind as a teacher, the continuity would be better, right? It is disruptive to miss a day of school for snow, so I would prefer the days to be within that school time. It's those last days at the end of the year that just kind of, they don't make sense to me, so. Anyway, but if that's already in the pipeline to be discussed, that makes me feel good.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too. I know a lot of parents have expressed concerns to me, and I've shared the concern that, adding, I don't see a need for 184 days instead of 180 days. I think the end of the year days end up being a waste, and they don't even know why they're there. And also when we don't have air conditioning in our elementary schools, and we're shutting down school several days at the end of the year because it's so hot, it just seems silly to me to then be tacking on another 4 days. I don't think that we get any benefit. And my understanding is that the extra days started because we got additional funding at one time for having additional days. But since then, the funding stopped for those additional days, but the additional days have just always continued because that's always what we've done. So, I would be in favor of not having those. And I also think that having more breaks within the year is a good idea, because I think that with all of the new programs and technology and things that we want implemented into the schools right now, it's good to put some Act 80 days in there and some time in there for the teachers to be able to actually start implementing those things and have some time to learn them and create things for their classrooms. And I just know that, when everything's that crammed, it's really difficult to have time to do that on top of the other things that you're always doing. So, I would be in support of that. And then I just have one other comment. If we have a snow makeup day on the same day that one of those other schools do not, and Palisades or Quakertown, and it ends up snowing, then that will be one of those days that we'll have that issue, because we'll be making up that day, and those kids won't be able to go to the boat deck if the other schools just have off and don't have that as a snow makeup day, right?
The 3 days that we've identified for February, March, April, they do match.
Oh, I thought you said that the one we have as a snow makeup day, and they have it as an in-service day or something like that.
This year, the Thursday before would have been different, but next year, the Monday now does match.
Oh, okay.
One thing we have to keep in mind as far as the calendar, people are saying they want more breaks in the school year, we want to end sooner, and we want to have a shorter,
Right.
and we want to have it, and you want to have fewer educational days, but we're educating all the students, and some families, when they have time off, will do educational things, and they'll make sure their children are doing worthwhile things, but other kids need school, and they need school, and if they're not in school, they're not doing anything. And if you want more breaks, some schools in some other countries have year-round schooling, and they have longer breaks, and people can do their vacations, but then they go more into the summer. But then we would have to have air conditioning, so it's a lot of issues, and really the calendar you can't please everybody, and everybody wants different things. They want more vacation during the school year, they want to get out sooner, but we have to remember we're here to educate the kids.
Well, I agree, I understand, but that's why I looked before I came. I thought, well, maybe things have changed since we left where we used to live, but I looked. And they started September 8th when we started August 31st. They still have a spring break, and they have an extended period of time at Thanksgiving. I'm not against educating children, and I do feel, I do think that you're right, that there are people that don't do valuable things with their children on the days that they have off, but I also do feel that we shouldn't always, I don't want to, for lack of a better word, but suffer for what other people aren't going to do. I think we do accommodate people in other ways, and there's definitely room in this, in the way we do things, there's definitely room to figure out how we can give families more time together, and instead of this, a day here and a day there. 180 days, I don't even mind going 184 necessarily, except for when it's those tacked on at the end. Like if we just went 184, and done it, but honestly, those last days in June, I think we're basically doing what you're saying is providing for parents who work or whatever, just to have somewhere for their kids to be. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, or maybe we need to be more understanding with families that want to take that vacation time in the year, because it's very expensive to go at certain times of year. And, if you're going to, on the one hand, say we have to take into consideration people who won't do something valuable with their children on their time off and that we need to educate them, then I think you also have to show the families that do want to do those things that you understand their situation too, and you're going to accommodate them in some fashion. It just needs to be more, there's not a lot of give for, it's one side giving, I think.
I just don't think that those kids having off those extra 4 days is going to be a detriment to their education. I don't think that those 4 days would make that big of a difference to their education, and I don't see any other districts, and correct me if I'm wrong, that add in those extra days besides that have longer school days than we do, or have 184 instead of 180 days. Am I wrong? Or there?
CB is.
There are other school districts that have more than 180 days, but I mean, that's a whole other discussion. We're deciding the calendar days. I mean, it's written in the contract that there are 184 days. So you can't just say, well, now the school board's gonna decide we're gonna have fewer days. You have to change the teacher's contract, which was just approved. So that's a whole other discussion of how many days.
Well, right, but
And it's in negotiations, it's a contract issue. And the other thing that you're not remembering is that we have to, in order to service our VOTEC students, we have to have the same calendar as Quakertown and Palisades. So if we just change our calendar and we say this is what we want to do, then we're going to be hurting the VOTEC students as well.
Doesn't Central Bucks, don't they send kids to a tech school?
Can you speak
It's a
up?
different tech school, and they might.
Well, no, I understand. I know it's a different tech school, but they do have a tech school that.
I believe Middle Bucks has their own enclosed, they're not, Central Bucks,
Self-contained.
yeah, self-contained.
But Lower Bucks, I know that where I went to school. But my point is, I understand that there's considerations, and that's why I started the conversation by saying or asking if if what exists is because of the contract. That was the first question that I asked. So if that had been said in the beginning, and then it's, set in stone. So,
I'm sorry, I thought Dr. Price said, and maybe I misunderstood, didn't he say that at the end of the year, though, there is a difference, because doesn't Quakertown and Palisades not have 184 days and we do? Did I get that wrong?
No, that part is, the end date of when school ends is different.
Right, so we have those extra days anyway, so that would only make it the same as them.
I believe one is 181, and they're in the low 180s, we're definitely the highest of it. So the end date is different. So when you get to the end of the school year for the VOTEC, they keep their teachers in session until the last school is out. So our students will have the opportunity to go to school, because they have to go by what is the latest school day.
right.
So the end isn't as hard, but they're all great points. And yes, some of this is contract driven, and we have to be conscious of that, but what we need to do is we really need to plan prior to that discussion with them. So I planted a seed that we may be thinking about possibilities for the future. So we almost next year should come up with version A, which would be very similar to this year. And if we have an alternative version, we can't next year yet because it's still contract related. We still can't change the number of student days, but if we want to consider a spring break that we wouldn't touch or something like that, I could present that option to them as long as we stay within the same total number. So but that could shift when days off are. We can work with that type of change and propose an option A and option B next year. Then we'll start that process much earlier instead of.
But people are saying, well, we want a spring break, and then it's around Easter, but then people say, well, that's expensive to travel, and then we're basing school off on people's travel plan. So, which is true.
When it is, I don't have a, I will just say that I think there's room to change it, to modify this, to still educate the children well, but also make sure that we're giving people a break and making sure that, I don't think that the instructional time is valuable on certain days of the year, and there's certainly room, I think, to change it. That's all I'm saying. I don't have an opinion on exactly which days. I'm just saying that we can look at it a little bit differently.
We'll bring a calendar to the activities committee next year, much earlier, prior to that meeting at the VOTEC, and then we'll look at some different options, and we can craft that together. I will say the one way that, since we have those extra days, you'll notice that all of our marking periods aren't always 45 days, because we put some extra days, especially in the spring when there's all that testing, and it's been in practice for a little while, is my understanding, because of the loss of instruction for all those testing days, that there'll be extra days added to that marking period to kind of compensate. So you'll see if you would count the days, they're not all exactly 45 days. That was the last item, so we hope to bring that to the board meeting on the 25th, unless anyone has an objection for this year's calendar, for the 16-17 calendar. Everybody okay with taking that to the board for approval? Okay.
Okay, so any public comment? All right, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
I think we would take, I would